Buenas, estudiantes. Hoy vamos a estudiar el Salmo 23. Salmo 23. Entonces, id, saquen sus Biblias, traigan sus Biblias para acá. Les espero. Go ahead and get your Bibles, bring them here, and I will wait for you. All right, so Salmo 23, Salmo 23, and here are the things we're going to look at in this video. We're going to look at the future. We are going to look at, finally, at long last, object pronouns. Okay, the little pronoun in me llamo Susan. Right, so that me, what do we do with that, right? And you guys have been poking at that for a little while. So we're going to talk object pronouns now. Direct and indirect. Oh boy. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the word por, as in para and por. So the words that are often rendered as for. So go ahead and open your Bibles. Abran sus Biblias al Salmo 23. Okay, let's look at verso 1 or versículo 1. So verso 1, Jehová es mi pastor, nada me faltará. Jehová es mi pastor, nada me faltará. Or as many versions put it, El Señor es mi pastor, nada me faltará. So Jehová, or El Señor es mi pastor. El Señor, the Lord. Okay. So Señor, we've talked about this before. El Señor Jesucristo. So Señor means Lord, and it also means Mister, but it's the same thing as in English. The word Mister is related to the word master, and even our word sir comes from the French version of this Spanish word Señor. So Señor means Lord. El Señor, in this context, our Lord God, right? It's actually really helpful to remember. I think we call our Lord the Lord, or we say, "Oh Lord," and we forget that the word means. We forget that the word Lord means Lord. The word Lord means that He's in charge, and we serve Him. The Latin for Lord is Dominus, right? So I think sometimes we forget that when we call God our Lord, we're swearing fealty. Anyway, all of that from El Señor. So Jehová o El Señor es mi pastor, nada me faltará. Okay, so most of you have probably already figured out that Jehová es mi pastor is the Lord is my shepherd. Pastor, pastor, shepherd. Now, priests in the Catholic Church are called padres, but evangelical pastors in Latin America and in Spain are called pastores. So the word for pastor and the word for shepherd in Spanish are identical. Jehová es mi pastor. Nada me faltará. So all of a sudden, we have this clause that includes both an object pronoun, which we'll get to later, that's the me, and has a verb in the future. So let's talk about the future. Faltar is to lack, right? So nada me faltará, that's in the future, so nothing will be lacking to me. That's where the object pronoun comes in. But faltar, to lack, faltará, will lack. Right? That's not a great verb to start thinking about the future with. So let's do one like caminar. And I've chosen one here with multiple syllables. It's a 3-syllable infinitive, right? Caminar. Because the future is simple. It's a straightforward tense. It doesn't play games. It's irregular much less often, and that's because it's actually used less often. If anyone gets got by the future, it's just with a number of syllables. People have difficulty with that. So I've chosen one with multiple syllables to make it really easy mentally to separate the stem, right? Once we take out that AR ending, and then the new ending to conjugate for the future. So caminar. Yo caminaré. Tú caminarás. Él caminará. Nosotros caminaremos. Vosotros caminaréis. Ellos caminarán. So here is the key for, remember, because really you just have to memorize this. Okay? Caminaré, caminarás, caminarán. And it's relatively straightforward. The key is to see where the stem is, right? So for caminar, we take off the AR, we end up with camin, right? So if you have a pet AR verb, use that, put in the future, memorize that. If you're someone who is memorizing endings, then make sure you get the right endings, right? So I have seen students focus on the last syllable, but these endings have 2 syllables. So camin, are. Camin, harás, right? So camin, hará. If you're memorizing the endings, then it's are, harás, hará. Are, harás, hará. Right? 2 syllables. So camin is that stem. What if we did something like, well, let's also do another verb for to walk. Andar. We take off the AR, the stem is just and, right? A-N-D, and. Andaré, andarás, andará. Andaremos, andaréis, andarán. No? So, those 2 syllable endings, the stress at the end, for most of them, and now we'll go over the ERs and the IRs as well. Okay? So let's go with comer for an ER. Yo comeré, tú comerás, él comerá. Nosotros comeremos, vosotros comeréis, ellos comerán. And then we'll go with abrir for the future. Yo abriré, tú abrirás, él abrirá. Nosotros abriremos, vosotros abriréis, ellos abrirán. Y ahí está. So I told you that this tense would be easy. Oh, sorry. Más café, por favor. That was not meant to be a deceitful cough. I told you it would be easy. It's not that. It is easy. Because it's straightforward and the same across the first, second, and third conjugation, right? Across the AR, ER, and IR. So that's very nice for you. So let's go back to that verb, faltar, right? Faltar is to lack, as we saw in Salmo 23:1. Jehová es mi pastor, nada me faltará. Nothing shall be lacking to me. But if it's used, so there, nada me faltará, we'll get into that, but it's sort of a passive construction. If it's used actively, it can mean to miss something, right? So if you miss a meeting, you can, so if you miss something that you should be attending, right, as opposed to, say, missing an airplane, that would be a different verb. But, you miss a meeting, you could use faltar. All right, so meeting is reunión. All right, so let's say I will miss the meeting. Yo faltaré la reunión. You will miss the meeting. Tú faltarás la reunión. She will miss the meeting. Ella faltará la reunión. We will miss the meeting. Nosotros faltaremos la reunión. Y'all, vosotros faltaréis la reunión. And then they, ellos faltarán la reunión. And notice how important these stresses are becoming, right? So, I've talked to you guys a lot about vowel sounds and how important they are to get right. And I've talked about truly stressing when there's an accent, right? So stress that penultimate syllable unless there's an accent, and then you hit that accent hard. Get your vowel sounds right, hit those accents, and you'll be good. You'll be understood. I was recently listening to a song that a student sent me, trying to hear this. It was a song in English by an American. And kind of in the background, he said a few things in Spanish, and there was one case in which he used the future. He said, "Volveré." I shall return. I will return. Volveré. But I couldn't, it took me forever to figure out that's what he was saying. And part of the reason is that he didn't stress the accented word at all. And so my brain was spinning trying to figure out, that wasn't the only issue with his pronunciation, but my brain was spinning trying to figure out what might be being said. So make sure you hit those accents, say those vowel sounds right, so that Spanish speakers who want to help you, they're pleased you're speaking in Spanish, give them that little bit of help. All right. So what I'd like to do now is look at Salmo 23 y quiero buscar todos los verbos que están en el futuro. Yo quiero buscar con vosotros a todos los verbos que están en el futuro. So let's find all the verbs that are in the future going through Salmo 23. So I'm going to read through this psalm. There are going to be a lot of words here that you don't understand, and that's fine, right? So what we're going to do now is I'm going to read through it. Every time I say a verb that is in the future, I want you to write that verb down in its infinitive, okay? It doesn't matter if you know what the verb means. So grab your notebook, read along as I read, get used to my pronunciation, and every time you hear a verb in the future, if you want to tap spacebar and pause the video, that's great. Okay, and then you're going to write the infinitive. Now, this is easier in Spanish or in the future than it might be in some other tenses, because all you got to do is just take off that ending and add an AR. And the truth is, and this is why it's sometimes confusing, this is why sometimes students, they won't think of the two syllables of the endings, because the first syllable of the ending is going to be AR, right, or ER or IR. But it's a good habit. Just go down to the stem and then add that two-syllable ending back, right? So in this case, because we're writing on the infinitive, go down to the stem and then add the AR, IR, or ER. So for example, when I read faltará, what's the infinitive of faltará? It's faltar, right? And what I'm saying is, don't just take off that a, take an extra step, just as a good habit with helping you get to the infinitives of other conjugations. Get rid of the ara, you're left with falt, and then you add that AR back, faltar. All right? Okay, aquí vamos. El Salmo 23. Jehová es mi pastor, nada me faltará. En lugares de delicados pastos me hará descansar. Junto a aguas de reposo me pastoreará. Confortará mi alma. Me guiará por sendas de justicia, por amor de su nombre. Aunque ande en valle de sombra de muerte, no temeré mal alguno, porque tú estarás conmigo. Tu vara y tu cayado me infundirán aliento. Aderezas mesa delante de mí en presencia de mis angustiadores. Unges mi cabeza con aceite, mi copa está rebosando. Ciertamente el bien y la misericordia me seguirán todos los días de mi vida, y en la casa de Jehová moraré por largos días. Lindo. Amen. Okay, so what verbs did you get? These are the verbs that are in the future in Salmo 23. Faltar. Hacer. The second one was a doozy. I'm not sure what you got for the infinitive there. But it's hacer, as in me hará descansar in the second line. Pastorear. Confortar. Guiar. Temer. Estar. Infundir. Seguir. Morar. And again, it doesn't matter whether you know what these verbs mean or not. It's an important skill to be able to run into a new verb and extract what the infinitive is. So those are the verbs that were turned into the future. Now, the future is used less often, but it's important to learn. You have to learn it, particularly to be reading texts. And you're not going to be able to get by with just voy a ir, right? Voy a caminar, I'm going to. You need to know how to use the future itself. And now you guys need to memorize it. You need to drill it. Use the language lab. But honestly, I think it's one of those where if you repeat it several times to yourself, spend a little bit of time working on it, you'll have it for the rest of your lives. Okay, let's talk about object pronouns. Finally, we get to talk for real about the thing that always gets asked on day one of any Spanish class, and was asked in this class, which is, why do I say me llamo Joseph, but not me llamo es Joseph, right? Because we're not actually saying my name is Joseph when we say me llamo Joseph. What are we saying? Right, so I've told you guys before that we're saying I am called Joseph, right? So I am called. So there are others who call me that, right? I am called Joseph. I am not the one calling myself. I am called Joseph. All right. So why does that work, right? And how does that work? And how can we get a phrase like nada me faltará? What does that mean? Well, I think the first thing to do is to think about English, right? We have the indicative pronouns or the subject pronouns in English, right? So I, you, he, she, it, right? We, y'all, of course, and they, right? Why are these subject pronouns? Because they're the subject in a sentence. I walk the dog. She eats the pizza. Now, what are the objects in those sentences? I walk the dog. What's the object? She eats the pizza. What's the object? So another way of asking that question is, what is the verb happening to? What receives the action of the verb? She eats the pizza is the object, right? Now, we can replace pizza with a pronoun, right? She eats the pizza, we can replace it with a pronoun, right? And that would be she eats it. That's an object pronoun. Now, if it were a robot eating a pizza, and we replace them both with pronouns, it would be it eats it. Okay, so sometimes they're the same, but they're playing a different role. They're not always the same, though. Let's say the dog is a female. I walk the dog. We can't say, I walk she. We know that, right? She is a subject pronoun. I walk she makes no sense. I walk her, right? She talks to I. No. She talks to me. So in English, the object pronouns are me, you, him, her, it, us, you, and them, right? So they give it to them, right? You can't, so them has to receive the action, all right? Him has to receive the action. Me has to receive an action, right? So, one of the things that people, parents will often freak out on their kids about are whether they're saying I or me, right? So, for example, let's see, usually it's in a plural, right? So, Susan and me went to the store. That's wrong. What's the best way to figure out if that's wrong? It's actually to take out Susan. Would you say me go to the store? No. Susan and me go to the store? Me go to the store. No. Susan and I go to the store. But the clothes are for me. The clothes are for Susan and me. That's fine. Some people will tell you to say the clothes are for Susan and I, but that's wrong, because you wouldn't say the clothes are for I. So, understand what a subject pronoun is, and then what an object pronoun is. Subject, verb, object. That's the order of every sentence in English. So subject, verb, object. Now we're clear on what an object is. We can understand what an object pronoun is. It's a pronoun that takes the place of whatever the object noun would be in that sentence. Okay, so we're talking about object pronouns, which in English are me, you, him, her, it, us, y'all, and them. Okay? So, the direct object pronouns and the indirect object pronouns are the same except in the third person. Third person singular and third person plural. They are different. And I'll explain the difference shortly between a direct object pronoun and an indirect object pronoun. Okay, so let's start with the direct object pronouns. Yeah, I just did that. Direct object pronouns. Direct object pronouns. Okay. Mete, lola, nos, os, los, las. Okay. Mete, lo, nos, os, los. Okay. So that vosotros is os. That's a little odd. And really, you're only going to find that in the Bible, in Spain, and sometimes in Argentina. But you guys know, I believe that it's best to memorize the three and then the three, right? So, mete lo, nos, os, los. The indirect object pronouns are metele, nos, os, les. So it's gender neutral. Metele, nos, os, les. So, direct object, metelo, nos, os, los. Indirect object, metele, nos, os, les. All right, so how are we going to find the direct object? Right, remember what we've talked about. It's going to be what the verb points at. So, Juan come tacos. Juan come tacos. Juan eats tacos. How can we say Juan eats them? Right, we're not going to say tacos. Juan come tacos. Juan los come. Okay, so it's going to come before the verb. Juan los come. Juan come tacos. Juan los come. Now, to find an indirect object, we have to ask, for whom is the action being performed, right? So let's start with a direct object. So if we say, Gabriel compra rosas. So Gabriel buys roses. Gabriel compra rosas. So we're going to say Gabriel buys them for a direct, right? Gabriel los compra. Well, let's say that Gabriel is buying them for Anita. Okay? So Gabriel, well, all right, so we're asking who the roses are going to be bought for, right? Who the roses are bought for. That's going to be Anita. So that's going to be third person, and it's going to be singular. We're talking about the indirect object pronouns, right? So, Gabriel le compra una rosa. Gabriel le compra una rosa. Gabriel compra una rosa para Anita. Gabriel le compra una rosa, right? So, Gabriel compra una rosa para Anita. Gabriel buys a rose for Anita. Gabriel le compra una rosa. Gabriel buys her a rose. Now, it's gender neutral, so we wouldn't automatically know that it's a woman, but often these things are in context, right? So we know we've been talking about Anita, so we say Gabriel le compra una rosa. Now, here is a big reason why you guys see a lot of these pronouns, perhaps more than you might expect. I've been talking in terms of replacing nouns with these pronouns, right? Which is what we do when we're speaking English. The thing is, as Spanish speakers, we'll usually use these pronouns while also using the noun that they're referring to. Okay? So, yeah, I'm not sure how I'd render that exactly in English, because English just simply doesn't do that. All right, but let's stick with Anita and the rose. Gabriel compra una rosa para Anita. Gabriel le compra una rosa. Gabriel le compra una rosa a Anita. That would be super normal. All right, so early on, the speaker is communicating that a rose was bought for her. Who is that her? It's Anita. That's a super normal way of doing things, of using both the pronoun and then what the actual noun that the pronoun is referring to, which means that object pronouns get used a lot more in Spanish than in English. Now let's look at a case where both an indirect object pronoun and a direct object pronoun can occur in the same sentence. And this actually gets pretty fun in quick expressions, like give it to me, right? You see that? Give it to me. And they actually can come out as one word, which is pretty fun. But before we get to that, all right, so let's imagine that Marcos is preparing us food, right? So, Marcos prepara la comida para nosotros. A native speaker would never say that. But let's say it again so we make sure we understand everything that's happening. Marcos prepara la comida para nosotros. So that for us, that para nosotros, we can just say nos, right? Marcos prepara la comida para nosotros. Marcos nos prepara la comida. Marcos nos prepara la comida. But let's take a look at that sentence and consider what the objects are. Marcos nos prepara la comida. What's the verb? Preparar, of course. What is being prepared? La comida. So that's the direct object. So that pronoun there, that los, that nos, is an indirect object pronoun, right? Because it answers the question for whom. Marcos prepara la comida. Marcos nos prepara la comida. Marcos prepares the food for us. Marcos nos prepara la comida. Now, what if we decided to turn comida into a pronoun? Okay, so Marcos nos prepara la comida. Marcos nos la prepara. Marcos nos la prepara. So the indirect object pronoun is always going to come before the direct object pronoun. Marcos nos la prepara. Marcos nos la prepara. Now, how else can that work? With something like give it to me. Okay? Give me. Like it's gonna give me. Gimme. Gimme, gimme, gimme. Dame. Right? The verb dat is to give. Dame. And it's one word. Dame. Now, what if I want to say give it to me? Dámelo. Dámelo. That's actually one word. Dámelo. A very fun word. A way that Spanish speakers encourage each other on to greater feats. Okay? It's especially common in the southern cone of South America, but it's common everywhere. Mexicans say this. It'll say, dale, dale. So let's think about that. Let's take a moment and think about what dale might mean, right? So You guys, of course, were copying down what I was when I was laying out all the pronouns. What's le? If I say da le, is le a direct object pronoun or an indirect object pronoun? Okay. So, dale. It's a way of saying give it to him, right? So you yell it at sports games. Dale! Give it to him. That it in there is kind of unspoken, right? Give it. That's, so that's actually not said. It's just understood. It's the indirect object pronoun that is said. So give to them. All right, so dale is give it to them, and it's just one word. And there's a bit of magic that can happen with these pronouns that I think is a lot of fun. So I've been pausing as I make these videos so often because the heater keeps kicking on. But at this point, I'm ready to push through. Right? So yes, maybe you can hear the heater, maybe not. All right. So let's have some fun with these things. 20 years ago, there was a band, an American band from California called Yo La Tengo. Yo La Tengo. Think about what that might mean. All right. So yo is just an indicative subject pronoun, right? Yo tengo, I have. Yo la tengo, what does that mean? Yo la tengo. I have her, or I have it feminine, right? I have her, I got her. Yo la tengo. Let's put 3 pronouns in a row. From yo la tengo, let's go to yo te la tengo. Yo te la tengo. I, for you, her, have. Yo te la tengo. I have her for you. Or I have it feminine for you. Yo te la tengo. So an indicative followed by an indirect followed by a direct object. Yo te la tengo. Of course, you'd say te la tengo because it's a lot of pronouns and we understand that yo is in that conjugation of tengo. But yo te la tengo. Te la tengo. I think it's super cool that you can do that. On top of that, as we saw with dámelo, give it to me. Right? We can see often these pronouns get attached to the ends of words, right? And you're seeing that in your translations for this second unit of the Easy Spanish Reader. Okay? So, if I say cómprame, so buy me, that's separate, but say comprándome, he is buying me. Or let's say he is buying it for me, comprándomela. Okay? So, let's set some expectations. I want you guys to be able to say things like, he prepares it for us. Okay? The constructions where you're throwing, say, 2 little pronoun endings onto a gerund or something like that, like comprándomela, I don't want you to be able to do that yet. But what I want you to be able to do is to recognize it, right? And I know that that sort of approach sometimes can unsettle you guys, but I think that's the way we can really learn best, right? So now you know a lot about how to use these pronouns, and it's going to start feeling more and more natural. You're going to recognize and immediately understand these more sophisticated constructions, and then at that point we'll be ready to sort of talk about how exactly we might more subtly use them ourselves. Okay? But we're going to embrace the fact that language learners always understand more than they can speak. We're actually going to use that and leverage that. So don't worry about being able to say things like comprándomela, okay? Or even dámelo, okay? But let's definitely recognize and use things like él me da pan, he gives me bread. Ella me da pizza, yo te doy pizza. Okay? So let's definitely know how to use those. Okay. Estamos en la hora, we are in the hour, in the time, estamos en la hora de volver al Salmo 23. Estamos en la hora de volver, return, de volver al Salmo 23. Entonces, Salmo 23, Jehová es mi pastor. Okay. So you guys have your lists of these nouns, right? These nouns that you got the infinitive for. I will now give you the meanings of these verbs, okay? So beginning with, so I'm not giving you the meanings of all the verbs. I'm giving you the meanings of the verbs that are in the future, which is what you wrote down. Faltar, to lack. Hacer, to do or make. Pastorear, what do you imagine that means? Pastorear. Well, it means to shepherd, right, as a verb. Pastorear, to shepherd. Confortar, it's a lot like consolar. And in fact, a Spanish speaker would normally, because this is kind of archaic biblical language, consolar is to console, confortar, of course, to comfort. Guiar, guiar is to guide. Temer, temer is to fear. Now, aside, this is a total aside that I can't help myself. If you studied Latin, you may have run in, or even if you've studied the Iliad and the Odyssey, you may have run into the expression, and I forget who said this, Timeo danao et dona ferentes. Timeo danao et dona ferentes. I fear Greeks bringing gifts. Okay? Dona, like, is to donate, that's gifts. Ferentes is related to our word for ferry or carrying, right? But the word I wanted to bring out here is fear, right? So timeo is Latin for I fear. Temer is to fear in Spanish. So I love that line. It's actually cited in the Asterix comics, but it's a famous Latin response to the Greek epics. Timeo danao et dona ferentes. That was a total aside. Temer is to fear. Estar, of course, is to be. Infundir is to infuse. Infundir, to infuse. Okay. Seguir is to follow or to go ahead. Seguir is to follow or to go ahead. And morar is an older word for to live in a place, right? We can use other verbs like habitar, which I think is used in your Easy Spanish Reader, or vivir, you can even use, which is to live, like biologically, you can use it for living in a place. Morar is a verb that also means to live, okay? And I like using a mix of common verbs and of verbs that you wouldn't normally use because it forces you to handle strange things. That's great for learning. Okay, so we've got those verbs listed. What I want us to do now is to translate this, and as we translate this, we're going to translate it from the Spanish, right? We're not trying to make an accurate from the Hebrew translation of the Bible, where this could, we could give this to people as this is scripture. We're not doing that. We're translating it from the Spanish. And we're going to run into the word por a few times. So we'll talk about por, and that will close out the video. Okay? So, Jehová es mi pastor, nada me faltará. Jehovah is my shepherd. Nada me faltará. All right, so we've got this pronoun, right? We've got an object pronoun. Nothing will be lacking to me. Nothing will I lack. Okay? En lugares de delicados pastos me hará descansar. Okay. So you guys know the word lugares, lugar. Delicado, it's a cognate. Delicado. What does delicado mean? It's a cognate, so you should know this. By context, can we figure out what pastos are? Okay. You may even remember Psalm 23 in English. Use that. But pastos, what are we talking about? We're talking about shepherds, right? And sheep. So think about what English word this could represent. Me hará descansar. So hará is future for hacer. Hacer here is working as a helping verb, and descansar means to rest. All right, so the end there, me hará descansar, will make me rest. Right? So hará will make, So will make me rest. That's the end of that. But en lugares de delicados pastos. Have you figured it out? En lugares de delicados pastos. So I'm going to go literally and in order. In places of delicate pastures. In places of delicate pastures, he will make me rest, or to rest, right? In places of delicate pastures, he will make me to rest. All right, make sure that makes sense to you. If not, pause. In places of delicate pastures, he makes me to rest. All right, junto. That's a word that I've noticed that students, so junto has come up, junto, junta, juntos, juntas, it's come up several times, but it's also one of those words that some students have tended to forget. So let's remember it from here on out. Junto, like the word joint, together. Junto a aguas de reposo me pastoreará. All right, so we said that pastorear is to shepherd, right? So will shepherd me. Me pastoreará. Will shepherd me. All right, so together is junto, but it can also mean things like right next to, right? Alongside. So I'm going to go with alongside. Alongside waters of repose. What is repose, you ask? Rest, relaxation, okay? Alongside waters of rest, waters of repose, he will shepherd me, okay? Él me pastoreará. He will shepherd me. Confortará mi alma. Alma is soul. So here's another aside with Latin. Someone's university is their alma mater, right? It's my alma mater. My alma mater is the University of Alabama, okay? So the mother of my soul. That might be too big of a term for a university if we're being honest with ourselves, but that's what a university says it is, the mother of your soul. Alma mater. That's Latin, but alma means soul. So, confortará mi alma. Will comfort my soul. Who will comfort? He will comfort my soul. Me guiará por sendas de justicia por amor de su nombre. So we're running into por, okay? We said that guiar is to guide. A senda is a path. There was a terrorist group in Peru for years called Sendero Luminoso, the shining path. All right, so, me guiará por sendas de justicia por amor de su nombre. All right, so guiar was to guide, as we said, right? So me guiará. What is that? Me guiará. Guiará is third person singular. Él guiará. Él me guiará. So he will guide me. Pardon me. So he will guide me through what? So we have two por in here. Okay? And so let's talk about por and para. All right? Por and para both mean for. Okay? And some of you may have heard me recommend that you see por more as by or through. Okay, so let's talk about this. So most books will tell you that para means for, and por means for, and has some other meanings. And how do we use them? Okay, I prefer to think of para as for, and then por as something else like by or through, and I'll explain that. Okay, all right. So para is for with an object, a very clear object. Okay, so here it's perfect that we're talking about direct objects and indirect objects right now. Okay, so this is for you. Eso es para ti. The present is for the child. El regalo es para el niño. Okay, so para is for with a very specific target. Okay, this pizza is for you. Okay. But here we have things like, well, por here, the first por doesn't even work as for, right? We can't say for paths of justice. We have to say through paths of justice or by paths of justice. Okay, and then the second por could be for, but we need to think of it as by means of, right? So for the love of his name, by the love of his name, through the love of his name. Okay? So he guides me by paths of justice through the love of his name, for the love of his name. So don't be afraid to make por, for. Just understand that it's that secondary use of for in English. If something is for something else, if it has a target, you're going to use para every time. So por, by, through, by means of, and for. So, me guiará por sendas de justicia por amor de su nombre. He will guide me through paths of justice for the love of his name. Okay? Now in verse 4, there is a subjunctive. And I'm actually pretty proud of myself for having found a text that uses the future and basically doesn't use the subjunctive. There's one subjunctive that's snuck in here. The subjunctive is the voice that talks about possibility, things that may be, right? So aunque means even, or even if, or although. Pardon me. Okay, sombra. Let's look at that word, sombra. Think about a sombrero, those hats. Any hat with a rim, whether it's a Mexican sombrero like this, and you hear the lonely guitar music and you're sitting by a cactus, that sombrero, or a regular hat with a brim. They're all sombreros in Spanish because they are shade givers. Sombra is shade or shadow, right? The word umber or ombra, there are lots of Romance words that use that ombra as shadow or shade. And we see that in our word umbrella. An umbrella is a shade giver. It brings umbrella. All right, so sombrero, sombra is shade or shadow. So even if I walk, now we're just going to slide right past the subjunctive. I'm going to tell you it means even if I walk. Even if I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, no temeré. So temer is to fear. No temeré means what? No temeré. I will not fear any evil, porque tú estarás conmigo. Porque tú estarás conmigo. So conmigo means with me. Tú estarás conmigo. What a beautiful thought. Porque tú estarás conmigo. And what rhythm to that? Porque tú estarás conmigo. Because you will be with me. I will fear no evil. I will not fear any evil. Because you will be with me. Porque tú estarás conmigo. All right. A couple of vocab words that were basically the Psalm 23 words. Okay. Tu vara y tu cajado. All right. So your rod and your staff. Right. Actually, cajado is probably more like rod. A cajado is a stick you hit things with. All right. Tu vara y tu cajado me infundirán aliento. So your rod and your staff will infuse me with breath. That's kind of cool, huh? What is it in English? Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. It will infuse me with breath, with ease. You can think of it as like just breathing, even, right? With, all right. Aderezas mesa delante de mí. All right, so you organize, you lay out the table delante de mí, before me, in front of me, en presencia de mis angustiadores. So presencia, presence. You'd expect in the presence of my enemies. I wonder if you guys can figure out angustiadores. It's not a natural, but you might have a flash of insight. I think it's kind of a fun word. Angustia is anguish. Okay, so en presencia de mis angustiadores, in the presence of those who bring me anguish, in the presence of my torturers, okay, in the presence of my enemies, we say in English. And I'm not making any comments about the Hebrew because I don't know the Hebrew. Ungir is to anoint. Okay. Now I know that at this point, like at the beginning of the psalm, there's a lot of stuff you're familiar with. Now there's a lot of stuff you're not, right? But I want you to follow along and see how everything can make sense to you as we go through this. All right. So ungir is to anoint. So you anoint my head. Unges mi cabeza. You anoint my head with what? With oil. Con aceite. Aceite is car oil. Aceite is olive oil. unges mi cabeza con aceite. Mi copa está rebosando. My cup, my big cup. A copa is a big cup, like la Copa Mundial, the World Cup. Mi copa está rebosando. My cup is overflowing. Ciertamente. Cierto is right or correct. So ciertamente, certainly. Ciertamente el bien y la misericordia me seguirán todos los días de mi vida. Certainly, good and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. How cool. Notice here that the articles, the definite articles, el bien y la misericordia, the good and the mercy, is used. We have to do that in Spanish for ideas. In English, we don't. So the idea of good, the idea of mercy. Now I'm going to take another aside. Perhaps some of you guys are familiar in the worship service with the sursum corda. Okay, that's Latin for up your hearts. Okay, lift up your hearts. Sursum corda. Corda is heart in Latin. Cor. Cor. And in French we have coeur. So Richard Lionheart. Richard. Coeur de Lion. All right, so heart of lion. Richard Lionheart. Coeur. That's where we get the word courageous. Okay. Now in Spanish, cor went to corazón. That's heart. But the word misericordia, which a version of that is common throughout the Romance languages, miserable heart. That's mercy. You have a sympathetic heart. You see the misery of a person, and your heart also has misery. Isn't that cool? Misericordia. Miserable heart. Mercy. That got into English briefly in the medieval period. So during the 100 Years' War, the English had longbowmen. They invaded France because the English king said they had a right to lots of land in France. For 100 years they fought back and forth, always in France. And they had archers, lots and lots of archers, longbowmen, right? And these longbowmen were capable of defeating these huge armies of armored knights, okay, and of armored men at arms. And no one else had longbowmen like the English had. These longbowmen, so the Battle of Agincourt, of Crécy, if you read Henry V, watch Kenneth Branagh's Henry V, and you can see at Agincourt all the mud and the knights falling and the men-at-arms falling, all this heavy armor. The archers had knives called misericords, right? Misericords. Those knives, so they took the name from French, those knives were for showing mercy. Those knives were for finishing off those who were wounded and were not going to recover on the field of battle. They were for delivering the coup de grace, right? That final blow. They were called mercies. They were called misericords. So maybe you'll remember the word misericordia now. Merciful heart, miserable heart, fellow feeling. Man, what a great word. All right, so ciertamente el bien y la misericordia me seguirán todos los días de mi vida. So certainly, the good and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. Y en la casa de Jehová moraré por largos días. All right, so we said that morar is to live, so moraré, I will live. Y en la casa de Jehová moraré por largos días. All right, you're probably prepared to translate this yourself right now. I'm going to go through in literal order. And in the house of Jehovah I will live for long days, right? For many days. All right. So here's how we're going to close with this last use of por. All right. So in the house of Jehovah I will live for many days. But again, this is not the for of an object, right? You could replace this with through. In the house of Jehovah I will live through many days. So for many days, duration. Right? So if it's duration of time, it's certainly going to be por and not para. Y en la casa de Jehová moraré por largos días. Qué lindo salmo. And I love that we were able to talk about three important things in going over this psalm. I'll look forward to seeing you guys at our next recitation.